Today, we're actually going to talk about NFT certificates of ownership, but we're going to do that in an entirely different way than what most people would be talking about this nowadays. And that's first to do some education around instruments. I guess that's the term that we can use. Instruments are, of course, contracts, bonds, certificates, notes, all these different things that we now use in the reality to transfer currency. But we're going to actually talk a little bit more about the origin of those things, how humanity's debt kind of got mixed up in those things, or not kind of got mixed up, but definitely got mixed up in those things. And what we can do now to secure a stronger financial future for not only our children, but also our world, especially the nations, or even your city, your street, your club, your community, however much you can continue to get out the awareness of how to indemnify into a different level of trust. And so what we're first going to begin with is, I'm just going to do a really brief recap of what's been going on with this project. Also, one of my cameras kind of went out today, so I have this camera to work with. So, don't mind if you just kind of see me from the side view today, because I'm just loving to look forward. And I also have my Zoom screen up, so I get a chance to see all of the beautiful participants who are actually in alignment today to actually receive this amazing transmission. And I can always expect there would be some type of bugs or glitches that would happen, especially if such knowledge was to be released, because it will release actually the very bonds that actually hold you. And that would be something that would be quite disruptive for the system. So we can expect a little bit of turbulence from time to time when we're speaking on certain topics. And it's just because there is a day and night 24/7 detail on making sure that most human beings never get out of the debt, always are underwater, which is another term for actually being a bit in debt, and not really having the currency that is necessary to get your time back, because that's what we want to talk about today, is actually how to buy time in order to offset your future, and which would be your destiny. So again, a brief recap is that we've launched now into what is a contest. We're calling them quests that actually allow you to win prizes. And part of those prizes are our certificates of ownership, or NFTs, for your participation and diligence. For anyone that is not participating, and I guess that would be those that are going to see this here in a moment when I upload it, this recording, you can actually look in the description and you'll find links on how to get started. And just recently, we actually began to discuss, our first session was around the Metaverse, and how there are already existing metaverses, and that metaverses are actually communities within themselves, and that you can implement financial models, monetary policy, and governance actually into your structures. And that's now something that has become more popularized by the blockchain. So that was our first session. Our second session actually was the launch itself of the quest. And so if you are starting the quest today, have no fear that there is still some prizes in there for you. There seems to be some competition in getting those first, second, third places, but the actual contests themselves, or quests themselves, are going to be continuing until I think it's about, we have maybe about 17 more days. I got to get specific dates on that. Maybe somebody can share, because it has been a nonstop venture in just approving some of the quests that others are going through. And we give thanks for all those that are participating and sharing this amazing project on other social networks and in your own personal social networking system. And so for us, this has been somewhat of a long time coming. This platform has been alive for 13 years. We have approximately 50,000 plus members inside the platform, and millions of impressions all across the internet on major social media channels. We have been delivering a multidisciplinary level of message. Maybe I got convoluted a little bit with those terms, but basically we instruct on everything that is important, because we see these things as relevant to the growth. So it's not just spiritual growth, it's mental growth, it's physical growth, and it's financial growth. So it's health, wealth, and wisdom, or some call that God, love, and money, and all of those dynamics that are in between, such as relationships. So this is actually a lifestyle program where indeed masters of social engagement at this stage. We actually have our own homegrown technologies. One of them is called Eneology. And these technologies actually allow you to learn more about yourself by being up to date with your what we call metaphysical metrics. So we've brought these advanced technologies and quantum levels of communication into these applications, and Secret Energy Foundation, Creator DAO, is here to not only continue to connect more humans in a unified way, but to also create more applications, software, and better instruments to govern ourselves. So I'll first begin with, why do people remain in debt? Now, again, I got this one camera going over here. It was actually a little low on batteries when we got started. So if we cut out for any reason as far as the visual, you'll probably hear audio. And then I'll put up maybe an image that will be a little bit more fascinating, so you'll have something to look at. But what I'm really asking you to do is not so much as pay attention to me right now, but really, really just kind of dial back like you're listening to something that, well, let's say, for instance, entertainment, you can kind of listen to entertainment and do something else because you're being entertained, you're getting the gist of it. You may hear some stuff, but you can kind of divide your attention. With education, especially with things like math, you really need to be on point with what you're hearing, because if you miss one part, then it could mess up your awareness and comprehension of the rest of it. So if you skip simple addition and subtraction and you try to enter, algebra, which is not too far away, it's still going to be very difficult because you missed addition and subtraction, or something that would be perceived as easy. So some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about is going to be a bit easy to understand at first. But as I begin to unfold this of the ramifications, not only in the physical, but also in the non-physical, not only in this life, but in the infinite lives that we actually will continue to inhabit, how these decisions that we're making now, even our financial decisions and how we're allowing our current or our energy to be treated, will actually have far-reaching ramifications and make up the whole of what could be called occultism, which is a term that means, occu means the eye, but secrets of the eye, if you may. And in this case, some will think of the eye on the top of the pyramid, but we've actually identified the eye as a symbol of the soul, as one will often know that their grandparents or mother and father may have said that the eye is the gateway to the soul. Indeed. So the question is, why do people remain in debt? Because that, of course, will be a big question for those who have had monetary issues and feel like they're just not getting this money thing. They may have gone to college and been educated, spent up a lot of money, and as far as racked up a lot of debt just for those college fees. They may have started a business, took out a loan, and kind of racked up a little bit more debt, and then saw that the business did not, pan out the way they thought, and just kind of wonder, so what is it with me? Because sometimes we'll put that all on ourselves and say, what is it with me that's not allowing me to make money or to get out of this debt and to actually begin to enjoy the things that I want to enjoy in life in order to be free? And the direct answer to that question, because we're going to be really direct today because we're not trying to take up a lot of time, but we do want to get the point across, is bondage, okay? And if you notice that in the beginning of the word bondage, there is the word bond. And if you go to your dictionary, or if anybody here has some basic financial understanding, you'll know the term stocks and bonds, right? And then the bonds seem to kind of come with the stocks. But we need to understand that the reason why that is called a bond is because there is something that is being bound by those certificates. And when we start investigating that more, we'll find that it is actually us operating in a corporate name or all caps name, which is how you see that on your driver's license, and that all these bonds are actually our debt that are being sold on the open market. So we've heard this before, those of us that have been involved in metaphysics. For maybe some here, it is your first time, but in the most basic way, you have to understand that the reason why we have currency or money actually came through a certain process that is rather archaic. It's actually been going on for thousands and thousands of years, and potentially even when we started counting time altogether. And so I'm going to do my best today to really take you through through a very amazing metaphysical journey of seeing how the reality is actually constructed, how money plays a huge part in that, especially for those that have been trying to separate church and state, and then how we can begin this process of actually freeing ourselves from debt, freeing ourselves from bondage, but first actually understanding what it is. So that way there's not this graying over that could happen even after a build like this, where you can maybe feel like, oh, well, wow, that information, there's nothing I can really do. And wow, that's just unfortunate. But that you actually leave this build today feeling super empowered with taking control of your life and your existence, and actually maybe the life and existence of at least your children. You know, maybe if you can get your parents to listen, and then maybe if you can get your siblings or sisters and brothers to also listen, but you'll probably have to explain it to them in the language that they speak. And so there are masters of what I'm going to present today. Someone is actually going to share a link inside of the chat of just that, masters who have gone through this already. And so if you want to take the deep dive, you can actually look through these videos. There's 21 of them that actually let you understand how anything that is attached to central banks and world banks and the IMF actually function on a system of putting you not only in debt, but actually treating you like a slave and your family like a slave, life after life. And that what we're actually developing here at the Secret Energy Foundation is another pathway, another road completely away from how that functions. And that means that we have to be abreast of, one, monetary policy, and two, governance. Because as I said earlier, that means how are we governing ourselves, and what are we saying has value, right? And how are we creating that value? So this does, of course, get into NFTs. I know some may get headlong in the conversation and say, well, what does this have to do with NFTs? And I will tell you everything, because NFTs, as non-fungible tokens, of course, that's the abbreviation, is actually now the digitized or blockchain certificate of ownership. And so while such tools can for sure be those of freedom, they can also be those of bondage. And this is why we actually see many of the systems or governmental systems now beginning to engage openly, because they were in many ways the initiators of the blockchain, and bringing in their own variant, which of course is the central bank digital currencies, and beginning the process of implementing those instruments under the guise of global warming and many of the other things that actually create upheaval, especially in financial markets. And sometimes the all-out chaos is from a level of health, meaning pandemics, and then also maybe threat to your own life, as in wars, in order to continue to perpetuate this system of bondage. So again, so the next question is, how do we even get in debt if we're trying to understand how we got out of debt, or how to get out of debt? Well, yeah. Past tense, how we got out of debt, because I believe that we've done that already. We began to alter the future or the path or the destiny that we're going into by dialing into the things that actually remove debt from our lives. And that's because debt is not just a financial thing. There are other kinds of debt, and that's also generally not considered. So you get all these people talking about how to remove yourself from debt with businesses and marketing, as if that's the only form of debt. Just as there is another form of abundance or wealth, right? Like having a lot of children is abundance of wealth. Having intelligence is abundance of wealth. So it's not just all about money. However, people have really gravitated towards the bottom line being money. But I'll let you know there's also creative debt. This is basically when you've conceived to create or do something and was never able to pull it off. Either you didn't have the ability or generally the time. There is also aesthetic debt, which is a rather new one. And this means, as a designer, when you actually are creating or want to create something that for some reason you just can't get your creations out as fast as your mind can conceive them. There's also what I call cultivation debt. And that just is that obviously you're a human being, so there's time that needs to be placed in that being, in this case BEAN, where, it needs to be planted, it needs good soil, it needs good sun, and it needs all the things that are necessary to make stuff grow. right? So these are different variants of debt that have not necessarily been considered. So when we're not actually considering all the debts, if you may, then some of them are left unpaid. So what I'll say is that now what we're really addressing, since this is something that has already taken place and we're huge on delivering solutions, is actually really buying time. Because you'll notice that in all of what we discussed today, that time seems to actually be the real component that is attached to currency, because everybody has 24 of them. So you get 24 units of hourly time every single day. Half of that is spent on the dream world, at least, maybe a fraction, 8 hours, maybe 6 hours if you really are optimized. But let's just say that you probably get about 14 hours a day in active time. And because you can't really buy time, so they tell you, then that is the real benchmark for what you can get done. So if you wanted to build 1,000 houses in one day, that would be based on how many people that you can actually get to work with you or for you, because you don't have enough time to be able to accomplish that, no matter how much skill you even have. And this is, of course, why the reality is beginning to augment into utilizing other things, such as robots, such as artificial intelligence. Company owners are even scrambling for this advantage, potentially, of buying more time, not only for themselves and their ventures, but also those that they feel responsible for. So to make it very clear, buying time is when you actually discover something or tap into something that allows you to compress the amount of time it takes for you to bring that to completion, or bring that onto the stage of actually having some type of value. And so I for sure am a big fan of buying time and utilizing technologies to augment me not doing certain things that are just repetitive and redundant for this society, and then wasting my time on creative debt, or eliminating creative debt. There's also one more. It did almost slip my mind for a moment, but it is probably one of the more pronounced ones, especially if you work in the technological space, and that is technical debt. That is an actual term. Go look it up. And what technical debt is that as you're working on building something like software or websites, that oftentimes you run into issues that will take a bit longer to actually fix. But there is a temporary fix, a script that can be created, or something that can be done to temporarily patch the situation, so that way things work for a moment. But there is some time that needs to be spent. Maybe some code needs to be rewritten. Some things need to be investigated of what is causing the initial issue, or how things can be optimized. But maybe if you're moving very fast, the developers are working at full tilt, they'll make that little simple fixed, know they need to get back to it later, and then maybe some other stuff comes onto the plate, some other features are being rolled out, and then after a while you begin to accumulate what's called technical debt, which is hours that developers needed to get in on that first issue, second issue, whatever, some of the problems and bugs that were temporarily fixed, and just kind of iron it out completely. And so that's just something to understand also about when there's a development, especially when there's software and these kind of things involved, that the developers can rack up huge technical debt. And as, I don't know what the term you would give it, but the manager of developers, you have to know when that's actually happening, because if you don't, then there will be a point where you get into like a domino effect cascade, where all of the debts that have been accumulated, or technical debts that have been accumulated, are now coming in to, would you say, redeem what they're owed in time. Okay, so that's a good way of understanding, again, that there is more than one type of debt. So this is not today just about focusing on money. In fact, I always look to the depths of everything, and I kind of bring things up from there. And to me, there's nothing deeper than the soul. So I always cross over as much information as possible that I get about the normal world, especially if it is a blueprint or very refined, and then kind of see, so what would that be metaphysically? Because that actually opens up an entirely new vista that has not actually been explored and that well. And that vista is about infinity, metaphysics, the dream world, if you may, the astral plane. These are kind of the things that we feel are important, even though they actually do not still have a subject in school. So there obviously means there's really something about the current system that we're in that does not want you to know at all about the power within. So I want to, I guess, begin also in another aspect of this by maybe explain a story as the tutorial that we have probably sent across the chat and you now have a link to is going to explain so proficiently. And that's about how many of your ancestors, I don't care what color you are, have come into the country that they're actually in, and how the country functions more of like a company. And the company is indeed billing and charging from the moment that the person, actually even before they begin to step on shore. So to do that, I kind of got to step back for a moment and see what would be good examples here to begin. But let's just imagine that all wars and all famines are generally created by the said controllers of the society. Some have called that or them they. Right. And we kind of got to a point where when there was too much of they going on, the question began of who is they? And the reason why I could say the better word is probably controller. And it's because generally when you're actually signing certain legal paperwork, there will be someone called the controller, and that is their title. Right. So the comp controller is a title of the person basically filing the paperwork and carrying on this buffoonery. So the controllers, if you may, and their system is actually archaic. I just looked at a brief documentary that was done by a YouTube channel called Mind Unveiled, who's been doing an excellent job at really bridging, some people in consciousness and how they think to the next stage of the obvious. And they were just, he was actually disclosing the path of the Vanderbilts. And while there's a lot more there, obviously the Vanderbilts were instrumental in actually stealing the entire maritime empire from the symbols and later on becoming Jesuits. He's kind of at the point where many of their affiliates are now at the robber baron stage and actually setting up massive trade routes across the world between countries and beginning to harvest all the resources from those countries and bringing them back to the crown. And the main way that you can tell that this is going on is that if you have any maps, mainly maps or manifests of ships and cargo, treaties and agreements, you will oftentimes see that the symbols of the so-called controllers always stay the same because it's like their signature. And when you understand the symbols or the signatures and the crests that are put on many of these companies, such as the East Indian Company, etc., then you actually realize that these are actually not necessarily separate factions. These are actually different corporations, if you may, vying for a piece of a pie that ultimately is going to have its lion's share taken by a massive corporation, which kind of goes under the symbol of a double-headed eagle, right? And so in this case, it's a remarkable way of looking at that. When we think about that, there's opposing forces. I think the biggest one going on right now is Russia and Ukraine. We have to understand for the leaders, respectively, generally they're in or engaged in something as far as a secret society or a club or something of that nature, where all of them are in the loop of the next process that's actually taking place. And it's unfortunate that even though the very sacrifice of the citizens themselves, especially the men, will for sure take place because it's now time for a transition. So let us look at this word soldier, which actually indicates a soul dyer, i.e. a dying sun. Okay, so a soldier in a war is indicated through etymology as a dying sun. Okay, so now let's look at where that etymology comes from, and let's imagine again that now there is one big club, if you may, and as George Carlin said, and you're not a part of it, that conducts war and famine when it's time to create more corporations. So let me show you how this works, because many have parents that may have been immigrants into the country that you're actually in now. Generally, at some point that actually happened. And so when a person migrates into another country, generally they're doing that under duress these days. I mean, who's going to leave their home, right? And so there generally has to be a situation occurring for you to leave your home. But if you can imagine even somebody coming from Mexico, they actually are coming to the United States with this promise that they're going to begin to live a better life. But that's generally because where they were living before was torn up by the same factions that we're talking about now, which is a primary corpus. So just to make it very clear, in stabilized countries, these factions bring instability to create refugees or people seeking refuge. And generally, if you're seeking refuge, it's because not only are all your resources gone, but you need to move. So generally, most people in that position do not have much or any money. That's generally the reason why they need to now go and seek livelihood somewhere else. So they're under duress. And that's what I want to make sure that we're all very clear here, because many of the contracts and the agreements that are being made with a person after that is actually made with them under duress. And if you know anything about law, you know it's actually illegal to elicit a response from someone or to make them sign a contract when they're under duress. However, this system perpetuates on and on because it's really also run by pirates. And so that means that they will try to get off as much as possible on you. There is no law that is going to bind them and restrict them from doing what they are doing unless you bring that law in place, especially within yourself. So you basically have no representation inside of their system. And as you'll see here in a moment, they actually have already sought permission to represent you, something like a power of attorney, where you give the attorney the ability to represent you and he can actually act on your behalf. So in this case, that power has actually been given to them by your very own mother, which is very unfortunate. As they say, as a woman is bringing a child in the world, she's not only exhausted from the labor that has taken place, but she's also elated that this child has come into the world. And it is in that condition that they begin to slip this paperwork on her that even doesn't seem like that there is an alternative to, meaning where a signature is being placed on a birth certificate. And in this case, the birth certificate is now the instrument that is being used to incorporate the child and actually make the child a ward of the state. And as the child is going through this process of as you can see, the child is birthed, which has everything to do with the terminology around the ocean or maritime law. And then the doc comes in, who is definitely the person who is the one that is at that stage delivering the child. And the child in this case is a vessel. And as you see, instead of allowing the child to continue to go forth or go freely into the sea, their cord is cut, which is the doc cuts the cord to the umbilical cord to the mother. And then the child kind of drifts out into sea for 7 years, and then is claimed by these wards of the state. And then they begin to form the bonds and the pacts and the contracts and things that actually allow this child to belong to them. But let me take a step back here and just clarify this more as a story. As I mentioned earlier, that those that are generally under duress are fleeing from their countries and going to others with a promise. And back in the day, this used to also be called indentured servants. And what it meant to be indentured is that you actually entered into a contract. And in this case, this contract was one that granted you a certain amount of wealth or benefit. Like, you'll be able to jump on this boat and we'll cover the ticket for the boat. We have a place for you to work. We'll cover that for you too. And you need to work for 5 years. These would be the terms. And in that 5 years, that contract or trust would be fulfilled. And then you can go along your merry way in dreamland. And, we're just here to help you start a new life. But in actuality, what would generally occur is, first of all, most people do not read the fine print. Especially under duress. If you're offering me a way to leave that situation, as what's happening in Ukraine right now, many will flee and say, well, great. I mean, I'm glad I at least get a chance to save my life, save my children's life. Generally, it will be the women that are shipped off in the case of a war. The men will actually not be allowed to leave in order for the women to go forward and, like cows, begin to reproduce again with the men in this new land. And their children will also be then again indemnified in the system over and over and over again. What we're looking at is a vicious cycle or a wheel. So someone comes in, again, signs a contract to be an indentured servant, arrives even on the first day onto this new shore of this new place, realizes that the place that they were said to have to work in is not really up to par, and that not only is their lodging needing to be paid for, which is not in the contract, but also the food that they need to eat needs to be paid for, and that is also not in the contract. And what proceeds from there is even the plantation owner will then sign another contract with this person for more labor. And what the person will then find themselves in, and this has happened to probably 90% of our ancestors, is they'll actually find themselves into this perpetual debt-based system where, because these instruments can be adjusted, meaning that these contracts can actually be changed because they have generally two signatures on them like money does. Because these contracts can actually be changed, that means that if something happens in the future, such as higher interest, such as the relocation that needs to take place, then that can all be adjusted within the contract of the individual. And what we found is if you actually look at any of these contracts, it actually shows that in many cases, some were put in debt over their lifespan, over their physical lifespan, intentionally, because this system happens to be so archaic that it's capable of even deducting debt from you after death. And this is actually one of the reasons why life after death is not a well-researched topic either, or something that is taught on, even though there is quite a bit of knowledge, especially since our ancestors spent most of their time working on that alone, about how to not only make a transition from this space to the next, but also how to do that in the most beneficial way, i.e. how to become a god instead of a servant. So we'll continue here. And we'll start looking at a couple things that I highlighted. Again, we sent some documentation or a video that you can watch later on that will give you much of the details. But I wanted to speak on some specific things because when we get into talking about NFTs, we can then understand why value in something that can offset debt will become important, and why the true solution to many of these problems that have been accrued over thousands of years is actually to make better choices, make better investments, and more importantly, make better investments of your time. So if you're running around angry, fighting, I mean, I really wanted to make this a most strange conversation as possible because I know some are going to be viewing and have no clue of even what metaphysics is. But I just have to tell you that the confusion that sometimes we're experiencing in life is actually a real thing that is being conducted by forces that you actually can't see. Some would even call them demons. But instead of polarizing you here today to be against the demons, I will say that many of them were just like us. They started off with no debt. And through a series of events with them asking others for money and signing or beauty or long life, and in their position of being in a mode of willing to do anything to receive that, they actually may have been tricked out of their very own existence as someone who at least can stand on their own 2 feet. Humans are indeed in a very unique position. We are actually standing at least at sea level or above sea level. And what this means is we stand erect. There's a reason why humans stand up and are not bent over like animals, and why our energetic field actually allows us, like a pendulum, to remain erect or to stand up. And this is because we are beings that know how to stand up for ourselves. we have something around us called an aura that actually gives us power and protection, or a professional technology. And that the whole act of these kind of laws and decrees and bulls are actually to poke holes or to wedge into our aura and to actually siphon our energy. So you can imagine this, if you don't want to think of it in a metaphysical or occult way, is that your job at times, when not being something that you want to do, feels like it's pulling your energy. Your interaction with the society, especially if it's not allowing you to eliminate debts and actually empowering you to do so, feels like it's draining energy. And there's a reason for this. There's actually a deep level of awareness that needs to be known by this planet. And that's just how systems, and first, which in this case, this system began as we know it as maritime law, but then was picked up under the mercantile edicts and actually became something that the Romans transferred over from being more of a spiritual thing that also involved women, since women are signing contracts when they're marrying men. There's dowries involved, and to actually create another system that was going to use this same kind of paper, same kind of contractual agreements to actually begin to bind actual physical people to their energy, okay, or to their currency. So let me see here. Where is a good place to keep going in this? I actually talked about this at least 2 times earlier today to try to at least get into something that I felt would be cohesive enough for everyone to understand. So before we shift gears into NFTs, I'm going to go a little bit further into this, and I'm going to talk about some of the definitions. So the attached value becomes the bonded surety of the contract. That's a good place to start. The attached value becomes the bonded surety of the contract. And so what is being mentioned here is that so your time and your energy is actually the attached value. Okay, so how much are you going to work over the next 20 years, and what is the value of that work? And if that can be determined, can we sign a contract on that? Okay, so just very clearly, if you say, hey, I can work for 10 years doing this, can a value be placed on that? And the answer is, of course, yes, because we have many instruments that we use financially where that's exactly what they are. They're hypothecations of the value of something in the future. Right? So I see some confused faces. So let's just say we hit the reset button. Let's start again. Value. Can you say that something will be more valuable in the future? And if you can, is there a way to write a check on its value now? And I'm telling you, yes, that's exactly how the financial system works in so many things. Your house, you could go buy a house, and first they say, okay, well, it's $300,000 for the house. That's how much the house costs. But then there's interest, which sometimes is not fixed. It can be adjusted. And also, this value is based on that the neighborhood keeps increasing and getting better and better. Not becomes a slum, because if it becomes a slum, the value is a lot less. So what happens is that there's a point where the value of something is determined. And what an indentured contract is when that value is recorded and then placed into something that can now work as an instrument to extract that value. So I'm going to go over this again because that's what money is. Money is imagine all of us, let's say in a country, have been calculated to how much we're worth in how much we can produce for the corporation for the next 20 years, for the next 30 years, or whatever the term is of the contract. And then that value, since we don't have that value yet, that's a hypothecated value. It's in the future. But that value is borrowed on, and a certificate is issued called a note. Okay? So this is your bank notes. This is your money. So this is basically a note that's saying, okay, 7 owes us in the future for 5,632 days or years of his skills and his ability, which we taught him in the university, that he used the corporation's name that we indemnified him under in all caps. He's agreeing all the time that he's a part of this. He's the grantor because he uses his driver's license and he rides around on the road which are licensed to, all roads lead to Rome. And he's engaged in a system that shows that he is a willing participant. And so we can then, since he's a willing participant, begin to issue notes on his value and bonds on his original value, such as his birth certificate. And someone can buy those bonds. Someone already bought them. From the moment that your mother signed the birth certificate, where she is the informant. This is a wild term. This is all legal. The mother is called the informant. Now, in the streets, we know informants are responsible for giving you time. Right? But in the legalese arena, etymologically, an informant is the person who is creating the form or the structure around you, who you are. So she's the informant. But notice how in the double talk, though, all of the papers that you're filling out are forms, right? So what is it forming? Here's another one. The dollar or the note that is being used, when we study metaphysics, we learn that there's a reason why most paper money is a rectangle. First of all, look at your door. Is that a rectangle? And it's because symbolically in the dimension, a rectangle is a person, because that is the golden mean or the golden ratio. So each dollar, so the word in English English words are always more telling. They're the most blunt with the occult. So the word in front of dollar is doll. Okay? Like a voodoo doll. And R in Sumerian means pentagram, which is the golden mean. The 72 times 5 is 360 degrees, a perfect circle. So we know an upright pentagram is a human being in the physical plane. An inverted pentagram means the person has been turned upside down or hang by their feet, which also shakes the money out of your pockets. And even the symbols of this corporation is they use an upside down pentagram as their symbol. As you know, there's many kind of jaded spiritual systems that seem to be fixed to an upside down pentagram. And most of the participants don't even know what it means themselves, but it means to turn everything upside down. So we have this word dal R, which actually means a pentagram or a person as a pentagram. So now we would get into the occult, and that's where most people stop. That's why they don't know anything about all this. They never ask, so what is it? What kind of paper is this? First of all, that a dollar is made from. So then we would have to kind of trace who makes paper. And I'm here to tell you that they're called the papists, right? The papacy. This is also PayPal, which is the papal. Okay, so these organizations that run money have been running money since day one. Never believe that there's a new thing coming with money. It's all an archaic, very old thing. And so to make paper came from an ancient occult tradition of cutting roots. They actually stole it from the sibyls and the oracles who knew how to take certain trees and then grind those trees into pulp and then flatten those trees and then write mystical words on those trees that had power. And you would be back there trying to figure out how it all worked, but somehow find that it did. That paper has power. More importantly, paper especially that has two signatures. And anytime there's two signatures on a piece of paper or anything that you sign, it means it can be negotiated without you being around. Also, because it can be negotiated means that the terms can change. So we sometimes see contracts as being static and not able to be changed. But it turns out, depending on what's in the fine print, and generally, most people that you see that are very prominent on the world stage, especially in politics, were lawyers first. They studied legal first. In many arenas, you'll find this, hey, you ask a guy, and he's a super millionaire or whatever. So what were you first? Well, first I started studying law. And this is what they ran into. Anyone who even knows trust law can't kid themselves that people are being bonded to trusts. And what a trust means is that we trust that you're going to pay us back for the next 20 years by giving us labor. And if you don't, we'll put the debt on your children. This is why in occultism, it started to become this term of selling your soul or selling even your children's souls. And it seems so, oh my goodness. And it is. But sometimes the gap is, because there's a gap between church and state on purpose, that people cannot cross that over to exactly what's happening in the reality because they don't know law. They don't know how our forefathers and foremothers, if you may, came into these countries and signed their lives away, trusting generally who they signed those contracts with because they were under duress. They just needed to flee. And as I said before, that first wave and generally the second wave were all women and children because the men needed to stay back and fight the war that they were going to lose. And the men were fighting against other men that didn't even know that their leaders were actually all in the same club. That's called a toy soldier. But when you start really getting the personality of the controllers, maybe you will wake up and actually realize that they don't give a shit about anybody. So it wasn't like when people came over struggling that they were welcomed with open arms and they were given a way to succeed. Let's talk about another aspect of this, because I want this to be very clear. I want to make sure that, of course, we understand the metaphysical side of it, because that's the easiest way to be free from it, to disavow. But also you understand the physical side of it, because if you don't have a metaphysical bearing, and I don't know, maybe you worship Jehovah or something, you may need another variant of this so it can become very clear that the people who have taken the position of rulers over us have sold us up the river with our own mother's permission. And the only way, see, what even happens is you actually reach an age where the contracts that were signed when your mother was your guardian and your father was your guardian, the contracts that they signed become nullified. Because there's a certain point that you reach for let's say, a Jewish lad, it's 13. For an American lad, it's 18. But literally, they write the contracts and the laws that naturally, by the natural laws of life, that these contracts need to be renewed at a certain period. So there's a point, and let's say for the American citizen, where 18, all of the contracts that your mother signed in your name and all that are no longer valid. You're 18 now. But guess what happens? You go get a driver's license and you reboot that contract again. So that's how the system is designed, that it's not a slavery system. It's double talk. It's not a slavery system as you know it, as if everybody was hauled off by a slave driver and then placed into a place where they could not fend for themselves. It was that people signed things and agreed to things and didn't actually understand the full ramifications of what was going to happen next. So there's a few other parts to this, and then we'll understand why NFTs, or non-fungible token, is a standard for saying, like, you are, in that case, an NFT. You're non-fungible. There's only one of you. See, money is not non-fungible. There's multiple pieces of money everywhere, and they have different values. But with humans, they're all unique. So each one is non-fungible. So the value of it is based on really the community. How much value you have within the community and those that are around you. That's where the value comes in at. So let me switch my notes real quick here, because I believe that we're still in line for a deep dive. We're going to have a short Q&A too. That way, it may spark out some of the other awareness that I have around this, because it's such it's like you're going in for a law degree. That's why I gave you the link. You look at those 21 videos, you're coming out with a real maritime mercantile law degree. And then from there, you'll notice then that your whole energy will change, because your goal will become to be a sovereign, to remove yourself from debt and to not enter into debt systems again. Because, okay, that's what I wanted to let you in on. So let's imagine then, so when do wars and plagues start? They start when too many people are starting to break even. So look at a country, right? Take the United States, the American dream. Even though there was a lot of stuff loaded in all of that, many people found a way to actually get themselves out of debt and even get into the positives. Many of those people just joined into the major corporations and became part of the secret society. They were initiated to actually use the instruments. We call them the devil's instruments, to use the instruments on their brothers and sisters, and they took that position. While some didn't know anything about that, weren't really recruitable, didn't have really any benefit, but they are no longer in debt for one reason or another. What does it mean to not be in debt? Well, generally you have your own land. Let me just show you how there's a difference between wants and needs, okay? Because some people can get confused about all this. There's a big difference. Needs are like food, water, okay? So as a sovereign, your needs, your first needs are generally what need to be addressed to become a sovereign. So if you eat a certain amount of food every day, until you get to a point where you can actually produce that amount of food, you're still in debt. So let's say, though, you end up creating a farm and you grow vegetables, maybe you're a vegetarian, and this is enough to suffice you. Now your only debt is time, because you still got to go out there and tend the ground and stuff like that. And obviously some things are easier to nurture than others. So there's some plants that you have to put a lot less time in. And then there's other plants that you just got to be there all the time. And we stop looking at things like that. But generally the plant that you got to put a lot of time in is generally a want. And I want this pineapple. Not a need, because there are resilient plants like katuk, which taste like greens, right? Or bok choy or kale, that when the conditions are perfect, it's almost like a weed. It's just growing everywhere. It's only when you may want the more coveted fruits or meats. So more time has to be spent. But what I'm just saying on the most basic level is the time that needs to be spent on you fulfilling your needs is your natural, that's your natural debt. And so the first stage of sovereignty is to try to basically sustain yourself with your needs before you enter into your wants. Because as you'll notice, so let's imagine then, because most people are into their wants. Like, hey, I'm not excluded from this. We have a lot of wants around us now. And generally those wants, they cost. They cost our time. They cost our energy. So we have to spend lots of time at work or war, because WOR, with a K, as they say, magic with a K, is war. There's a competition. The moment you hit in the corporation, everybody's rolling, roll. You're a vessel, you're a corpus or a corporation, and now Apple is fighting IBM, even though they're both owned by the same company. Nobody is bought into the awareness of what's going on that is uninitiated or hasn't reached a degree to where they need to be included to be aware of what is going on the top levels. So what I'm trying to get you to see here is that when too many people start balancing out in a nation, as many which so-called Americans have, they need to create some kind of chaos. Now, I want to take this into other countries so you can just see it very specifically. But also remember, this happens in states. This happens in neighborhoods. And this is when something occurs and it takes all the value of the neighborhood or the state or the country out of it. Wars do that. They tear up everything. So that once nice area is now full of huge craters, so it doesn't have any more value. But generally, before those wars come, there's a point where people actually start seeming to break even, and too many of those people are not going into the club. Also, this means that when people start breaking even, meaning that they actually start sustaining themselves, it means that the system that has been created starts slowing down and locking up. The debt-based system stops perpetuating. So this means that all the people that were aligned and are aligned in with these different groups that play around with these instruments, they now need to go to a new place. They came to Costa Rica. They came to your homelands. They go to a new place and they set up shop. They generally come in, they find first the resources, and then they have several methods to begin to come in and to take the land and take the resources from the original people that were there. The war is caused, so now they got this huge workforce. That's what they call it. It's a workforce, a huge workforce coming from another country because they're fleeing. And then they come into the same stores when they buy their shovels, when they start taking out their loans, they come into the same businesses and stores that were once in their town that were no longer being patronized because everybody was realizing what was going on and was removing themselves from that system. So this gets into some ugly things too. And I'm not shy to talk about it. If I was, I wouldn't be at the level of existence that I am now. If you really understand the founding fathers of America, you actually know that George Washington was a black man. Go look at the ship log. You know that Abraham Lincoln, which is the reason why he's on the penny, was a black man. You also know that Benjamin Franklin, who's on the $100 bill, was actually a racist. Some even think that Benjamin Franklin is Albert Pike, and people haven't caught on to that yet because of different stylizations. The Ku Klux Klan or the cult of Kukulkan, and what later on happened to many of those traditions, because America was actually Mexico, if you know anything about even recent history. But you can understand the denomination, though, because once America went bankrupt, because that still means that many of those black men, as you'll know, that Jamestown and the sale of tobacco, where most of that went to King James's pockets. And there were many indentured servants there. So this is not a color thing. This is something that's happening to everybody. And when there is a new order, as they would call it, a new world order, then the old ones get removed. They are denominated. That's also a spiritual term, demos, democracy. It means that you're lowered, which is also where our word Lord comes from, Lord, Lowwered. So you are lowered, and that happens in your denomination. So now you're worth a penny or a fraction of what a man, which we even call $100 now, one man, is worth. You got $1, But then the biggest value you can get is a Benjamin. So this occult structure is so interwoven with our society, it's almost like got everybody into a dream even, where we can't see that real sorcery. What sorcery really is, not Harry Potter books, but real sorcery is being worked. And the thing about magic is always very illusionary. It's like you can't really see it. That's why magic gets that forte of being something invisible that can't be seen. But we often don't see the magic taking place in our reality every single day. So now that you're a bit more aware of what's happening, and you can see then how the ebb and flow of life works based on currency. So what is being lent to you as a debt when money is given to you is the currency of everybody that is inside of the system, but it's their current in the future. It's even tricky to call it currency because current means right now in the moment. But really, this is about the energy of the future. So this is weird. I mean, trust me, even today, I was coming in to talk about NFTs. And something was like, oh, great. Let me even show you more about what these instruments are really about. So also, when we really understand this, we understand, as we talked about earlier, so how do you get out of debt? You get out of debt by making better decisions. Right? Let's see if that camera can pop on real quick over here with my good friend. So this camera's over here charging up. You get out of debt by making better decisions. Like once you're aware of this kind of thing, now you have a different strategy. And then your investments themselves become what you think more about your investments, right? For real. You know how our parents say, hey, you need to think about your investments. Yeah, why? Now I'm giving you the real reason why. Because every investment that you make could potentially remove you from debt. Now, let me show you also something else about time, because time doesn't really exist. That's why money doesn't exist. But we will desist from that for a moment, because those are vistas and rewards that you can eventually get to. But time doesn't really exist. So that means that, we good? Yes. Okay, so let me try that. 1 second. All right, yeah, I'm just a little low on the camera, though. It's great to have someone in the studio, so because I have to be jumping around there and fixing that too. So I just want to take a moment. Maybe it got a little too serious, man. Crack a smile. Like, just remember, knowing is half of the battle. G.I. Joe. I mean, I'm just saying, like, I know a lot about this for years, but I'm telling you, like, there's something about awareness and when it's your time. Because sometimes you'll hear something that you already know, and then you'll see it in an entirely different way. And so hopefully you're having that same epiphany too. And of course, I always have some extra gems to drop on top of stuff that makes it a little bit easier to comprehend. But this is some pretty serious stuff. So it's always good to crack a smile like, wow, now we can smile that we're really going to be able to get out of this shit. Because now we actually know what we're in. Because since there's no time really, this means all this system is designed to actually create time. And that's really what currency is. But it's more like a prison sentence. And what actually happens is when you master it, your future actually changes now. See, the reason why a lot of people don't do things that will take them some time is because either they don't have it or they're trying to get like an immediate gratification or reward. And they feel like, well, shoot, I'll do that next week. I'll start investigating that or studying that tomorrow. Anything but today, because they do this calculation in their mind right away of how much time it's going to take. Well, shoot, it's going to take me 2 years anyway to finish that book, or it's going to take me 10 days to finish that book. And they start doing this calculation on time, but I'm telling you, you're wrong about that. The moment that you decide to really make a change, the real one, not the fake one, you change in the future, because there's no such thing as time. So you actually change your path. You change your destiny. These are the real keys to how to change the destiny virtually instantly, but it's based on you really telling the truth to yourself. Because you could say, yeah, this is fascinating, right? And you could get off this call and then by tomorrow you didn't look at any of the videos. You're like, I'll look at it tomorrow. Because what? Because you got this bottom line. bottom line. Now, I want to talk a little bit just again about the detail, because the devil's in the detail. Now, in work, when we call it the detail, what we're talking about is somebody who is going to come in and work on everything, like go detail the car. Okay, so the true term, the devil in the detail, I believe actually comes from a hidden world that perpetuates disasters for you until you realize what's going on with your energy, because all this is really about energy, just like they show you in the Matrix. Money is just now the last trickle down piece of paper that is supposed to record a fraction of the value of the energy that is being stolen from you in the future. That's what money is. So you're not at the control point yet. So it's important for us all to see really where our true value is. It's important for us to see that we can change for real our future if we're willing to stomach the present and what's really happening on the planet. And that most people will tuck their head in the dirt and insist that this is not real because they're in bondage. And what I need to explain to you now is how those bonds work, because without somebody removing the bond, how can you be free? Bonds are when you're glued to something or shackled to something. Okay, that's what a bond is. So how do you break the bond? How do you break a pact? How do you break these oaths? How do you break these contracts? And so I first want to mention the detail, because what happens is that people have things going on in their life and they don't know how they're perpetuating the chaos for their own demise, like arguing all the time. Because you don't understand what is causing those arguments. You may even think it's the person in you, but you won't see what sometimes sparks that off. That's why many of the elements, they're everywhere. Fire is everywhere. As long as I have something combustible, I can light and bring fire everywhere. And that's deep for an occultist, because they know that they can bring a fire spirit anywhere. And we know fire has a tendency to be a very angry, kind of agitated energy. And then when fire starts getting thrown back and forth, as they say, hey, you can't fight fire with fire, but we try. And then we have a full-blown argument. The word AR also means fire, as in a pentagram is a blazing star, okay? It's a reference to the human body again. But that fighting, you have to realize that on the other plane, the job of the entities that are still working the debt off is to troll you, literally. That's how they make money. That's how they get paid. I know some people may not get that. But the rulers of this world, they're not physical anymore. They're non-physical. Their arts were necromancy. You call it dead presidents. They love dead presidents. Anything dead and you're still kind of worshiping it and talk about it, that's necromancy. Now you got it on this bill and everything. I mean, what are we doing? Nobody's asking. It's all foreign now. And that's why I said in the next 5 to 10 years, either one or two things are going to happen. People are going to come into a complete revelation, or they're going to go into oblivion, because they're just going to be oblivious to how everything is taking place, because the last little remnants of spiritual knowledge that are left to disclose the inner workings of these other kingdoms will be gone and replaced by things that look like, hey, this is what we're supposed to be doing. So I want to make it very specific that, especially many of the latter pharaohs, if you ever see them on the astral plane. See, the thing is that if you notice that all these systems that you're seeing in the world seem, especially the secret society, seems to really congeal back into a lot of the Egyptian stuff, mainly the modern Egyptian stuff, where everybody gets a new stylized and a new change and a new facelift. And in those cultures, what they talk about, if you ever study what's going on in Kemet, is that there's a courtroom down the halls of Amenti. That there's a moment where there's like a weighing of the soul even. And there's like even these prosecutors that are there and these testifiers that are there. And then you're there and someone else is speaking for you, generally whatever God you chose. And this is just what they're saying in the book. Of course, I don't want to go on to any conclusions here. But what I'm trying to get you to see is that if you considered beyond this life, as many of our ancestors did, you would not only have like a different view of existence, because it would be like you came from like a fishbowl and you went back to the ocean. Instead of thinking you only had max on average 72 years in the matrix, you will realize that actually you have an infinite amount of time. And that you can begin to manage your time and then actually begin to nullify time and then even regenerate. And that's, of course, what the other traditions are about. There are traditions that talk about how to run the clock back. Old Benjamin Button face. It won't physically happen to you, but internally you will feel young. You'll feel like a child. You will move like one. You will have the strength and the joy like one. Right? That's the other arts. So just I don't want to make you believe that there's only darkness. There cannot be. But for sure, it's thrown in your face more. And there's a reason why darkness always cannot prevail, because it would just corrode and erode everything. You see what I mean? So there's some real perpetual principles things. Things always go more towards what we call positivity, because it keeps things rolling. Versus negativity, like things just collapse upon themselves and are diminished. But it's also very useful for contrasts. The universe is a university. But the payment. There's a reason why pain and paying, P-A-Y-I-N-G, P-A-I-N-I-N-G, sound the same. Pain and paying. Because there's like a tuition here. Hopefully you get the intuition, but there is just a tuition. You can get an intuition, and the intuition will start teaching you, hey, something else is going on. Maybe you need to wake up, Alice. Wake up, Neo. To what? And then, again, occultism doesn't help. Spiritual knowledge doesn't help at times because it makes everything seem so off plane in another dimension or another galaxy far, far away. But no. Right here. Until things change for you here, there is nothing else. So this is how you can bring all yourself into this moment. It's not necessarily by doing a ritual or anything like that, but getting to a point where it really sinks in. The gift that continues to be given to you with this knowledge and wisdom about what's going on, because it's not falling on everybody else's ears, nor could they really receive it at times. Even you right now may struggle with trying to understand what I'm saying, but stick to it. I would tell you that there are many here that have been here for years and they started off the same way. And I could tell you I was one of them. I was getting messages and listening to things and I had no clue of what those things meant. I got all of what I'm telling you right now in a download 13 years ago with my higher self and had no clue of what I was listening to. Until over 13 years, I could actually decrypt the message that was given to me, and then learn enough about occult knowledge to then match it up with what was really meant by certain things that I may have taken too literal or not literal enough, or that I took exoteric and should have been esoteric, right? So this is a process here, but it's like if you spent your time with it, if you spent the same amount of time that you spent in school on this, oh my goodness. The potential of what you could become is beyond maybe a representative for a Fortune 500 company. Definitely probably not an owner at this stage, but just a representative or a manager or any of the other titles that they want to throw around. They're good at throwing the titles around. They know the psychological game, right? Oh, you're the chief warden and manager and executive of the third gate. Oh, shit. What does that mean? You clean the trash. Oh, what the hell? I thought, okay. Can I move up from here? Sure, you could become the executive chief warden of the trash cleaners, but that could take 10 years. Just keep working, son. Don't focus too much on that. You see, focus on that stain right there. You see, so it's all a game for real. It's a gamified reality, but it's like the casino. And that's actually one of our builds about cryptocurrency. Casino or what? I mean, what are we dealing with here, right? And just to bring it into center, what we're dealing with is when we actually start paying attention to the ethics and the essence of the things that we're investing in, it will already tell you what's going on. I think that's Maya Angelou says, believe people when they tell you who they are. I mean, that sometimes when you be watching folks clowning and acting crazy and getting into arguments and fighting and everything, and then now you want to go get into a partnership with them. You should have believed that you thought that was going to change. So the detail is on this astral plane, as you may call it, there are so many entities. See, more entities have left Earth than are here now. Okay? Remember, Earth has been going on for a countless amount of time, which you're calling Earth. And not all of them make it back into life. Life is a gift. Okay? So for you to be given the gift, and who knows when you may roll the lucky number lottery again and be able to make it back into a skin suit. But life is a gift. So with that being said, we have to realize that there's a lot of life that exists in a much more bigger space. See, Earth, they're even trying to measure Earth. You cannot measure the astral plane. And so the entities there that are there are what we call disincarnate, meaning they're not incarnated. So they actually don't have physical bodies. They have astral bodies. You can see them in the dream because that's the body that is akin most that we have to what they're using. But those bodies surround the very field that we're actually in. It makes up the liquid crystal display of the realities around us. And that's why when you look at trees and you happen to have the third eye open, you'll see that the tree is very much alive. It gets a little scary. You're like, well, shit, everything's alive. Ah! And then, you're trying to realize all is self, which is the whole point of spiritual growth, is when you finally get to the point of realizing all of what you are. Okay. And that's a step-by-step process. None have seen the face of God and lived. And what that means is the moment you will see yourself as the God, your old personality dies. Right away, he's God. Because when you wake up, you will never be like that again. It just can't. It won't take. People be trying to drag you back in. Yo, do this. You're like, man, I'm out of here. It won't take. It can't meld. It can't bond. It can't stick. And we're learning that now about resonance and vibe, as they call it, vibes. We're learning about a little bit of that now, but this is the foundation of that. So the detail are entities that are around you because at time or can be around you if you're vibrating a certain way. And that vibrating, it's very easy. Fear, death, jealousy, greed, anger, all of those. We got a lot of the words in the dictionary to actually describe, disturbance, all of those, distortion, lots of the D words, because D's are half circles, right? So they need their other half at times to be perfect. But at the end of the day, etymology is perfect in explaining to us what is going on. And in this way, we could get to a grander awareness that all eyes are really on us. You be running around here thinking that nothing's watching you, and I'm telling you, everything is. And you are everything. And the divided parts of you, meaning the parts of you and your consciousness that are not in alignment, they work against you. That's why in the Kemetan laws, they say they testify against you. They're called the disagreeables. They don't like you. There's always somebody that don't like you. But at the end of the day, we're talking about something going on inside. It reflects outside, but it's when you don't like yourself. And when you don't like yourself, you argue with others. You fight. You say negative things to yourself. And you be thinking it's all you, but I'm telling you, something is sparking that. And you need to make sure that you have the right kind of balance going on within your system to where it can't catch fire. Maybe it creates some warmth, and that's useful. But if it's going to burn everything up, that's not what we're going to talk about. That's not what we're going to allow. So just to be very clear, the detail is full of a bunch of minions. They do get that name, but they're not like yellow and short and cute. Unfortunately, that was kind of like Pixar's ideas. But anyway, there are minions. Why are there minions? Because they got to work. They're still under contract. They still have debts. And the kingdoms are much more strenuous about getting work done. You notice how at the job these days, if you don't do what you're supposed to do, maybe the boss doesn't pull out something and hit you with it. There's laws against that. But in other planes, those laws don't really exist. So those entities get punished when they haven't caused chaos somewhere or with something. So that's also why when you remove yourself out of those frequencies, they don't have that much time to spend on you. You just got to stick to it. Like, man, just stay out of the conflict long enough for them to realize like, yo, this is Chief Demon's mad at us today. Why? We couldn't piss anybody off. What about go pop the tire or something? We tried that already. It was also an intervention from them getting into an accident. Yeah, we got to tell Chief Demon about that tonight too. What is it? It's kind of like everything's working against us. Yeah, because they're working for themselves now. In fact, they're not calling it work anymore. It's fun. They're funning. I don't work anymore. They don't even have a word called funning. I just, they have funyuns, but not funning. So at the end of the day, it's just about being on point and now stepping into your maturity. So let's talk a little bit about NFTs just very briefly, because obviously that wasn't the bulk of the conversation. That's why I didn't even want to name it NFTs, because it wouldn't have got no views. If I said how to destroy the demons on the astral plane forever in order to remove yourself from infinite debt. Remember that title. Remember that title. Oh my goodness. They're smashing that. When I say NFTs, ownership tokens, you hear the crickets because shit, it's not entertaining, because real education doesn't become entertaining after it gets saturated, especially by imposters. And that's why they want to bring out these instruments anyway in the blockchain and all that. Let's get over with it already. They're going to try to create their own bank. They've been running around fearing everybody creating a bank for thousands of years at this stage and warring with everybody to not try to put their face on a coin and trying to keep tribes and things disturbed and everything. Now they're like, look, let's just let that happen and they'll get over that already, especially after they all rug pull each other, because that's pretty much what we've seen going on in the space. As my teacher taught me, he said, Seven, it's not about minting a contract. It's about being able to get in front of people who know what they're talking about and explain your monetary policy to them. So it wasn't just about minting an ERC 721 or whatever. It was about really understanding we're talking about governance and monetary policies, not silly looking apes. You notice how also every time something trends, it's always called an ape. Let's just wait for the next trend, and maybe you'll call yours the ape. Make sure I get my cut, because I'm trying to get paid for it. Trying to buy myself out of this debt. But it's always bathing apes. Now it's bored apes. Anytime something comes, it's apes. It's like they make apes out of us. Why? Because watch apes, watch monkeys to understand what's really being conveyed. Have you ever studied monkeys? Go watch, what is that, buddy, Atkinson or whatever? He's got an expose on monkeys. And they'll show you they are so hierarchical. Man, monkey can't sit in another hot pool with another monkey unless he's on the same rank. Monkey can't eat the same food other monkey eat unless he's born from a certain line. Monkey's baby cannot eat, will always be a slave to the other monkeys if the monkey mother that birthed that monkey is still not in the alpha clan. And this is monkeys. Do you really know apes and monkeys and why they use those kind of symbols? So what I'm getting at here is that still, if you really investigate the essence of the projects that are actually on the blockchain, they actually are very compromisable anyway, because at any point where the International Monetary Fund would open the door for them, they would just fly right through it anyway. because all they're trying to do is get some yield farming and a bunch of Ponzi scheme shit going on. They have no idea how to implement value into something that is still so advanced that few can actually connect it into the present time that we're in. That's why we keep opening up the Pandora's box of all these technologies, but the legal system can't actually catch up with them. That's on purpose. So there can be this huge gray area or moment or of exploitation before regulation steps in. So you got to be educated about different things to understand how to place your money somewhere. You need to check and see, do the people that you're investing with really understand monetary policy, or are they actually just riding a trend? Do these DAOs that we're contributing to and we're following, do they really understand the infrastructure of the DAO and why it acts as a force field and a shield against these legal systems and structures? As I've already explained, the DAO is the legal system and structure of governance for indigenous tribes, because indigenous tribes do not have to abide by the laws of the land if they don't want to. But many of them have been convinced to do the same thing for the perks, the caveats. And see, that's why that gets into wants, because if you do want to go to another country as a sovereign, you need your own plane or boat, generally a boat. Because when you get out in that ocean, nobody, if they can board for a moment if they think something is going on that is breaking maritime law. And it's nothing like the streets where, you just get pulled over all the time. The ocean's big. But if they do think you're carrying drug cargo, they can request to board your ship, and you can even say no. But if you're out on that water and you're obeying a maritime law, you don't need a passport, and you can dock at the ports, refill your vessel, and then go back out to the ocean again, because you have your own vessel. You're your own law. You have your own law, your own master. However, you need to know how to sell that ocean, though. Don't jump out on that open ocean. Don't come out of that port and don't know what you're doing. Like, talk to any sailor or fisherman. They got stories galore about, but they somehow live to tell the story, though. But there's stories galore about being out there. And that also is what goes on in the astral plane. I will tell you the truth, that you need to be able to navigate when you get on the astral plane. And what planets are, they're like hotels. The same way cities developed and countries developed, they offer protection. That's what they do. Now read the contract. So for you to be in our country and for us to protect you with this big ass army, with all these pentagrams on us, and we got full birds, we got generals, we got the whole nine. Everybody is decorated in occult regalia, even though they need the brass and stars, all that on the astral plane is like, oh my goodness, is that a noble? Is that a baron? I'm just a lowly life form. You see what I mean? All that means something on the astral plane, but here, unless you're on the base, it doesn't mean anything. But on the base, you know what I mean? You see what I mean? So there's something else going on. And again, I find this more to be fascinating at this stage. Before, I was terrifying because I need to figure out how to get above water. So what I'm telling you is it starts with the decision making. And when you start thinking about the things that you have, your wants and your needs, you start working with being able to sustain your needs. So we're all in this process, even me, of activating full-on sovereignty. Even to a point where we're getting into the wants. We have boats. We have land. We have our own wells. We have our purification systems. We have our permaculture systems. We educate also in that. And the main thing is we have our own industry. I can't say that enough. That's a utility. If you're producing something that other surrounding tribes and people find valuable, now you can sustain your community. And that's how so many communities fail, because they felt that, hey, we need to get away from society, a breakaway society. We need to get away from society. It's a debt-based system of predators. Let's all go and stay together on this farmstead, try to support ourselves. But they wrote generally no monetary policies. They wrote no manifest, because there needs to be a manifest. Look at the word. There needs to be a manifesto. This is all what we're agreeing on, and it's written. Why? Because when there's a conflict, certainly conflict will arise. Every person is made from an element. Some have more fire, some have more water, some have more air. So what happens when you put them together? Combust. So you have to know how to design something where each element is complementing each other rather than nullifying each other. This is the real mechanics. And so there's going to be some combustion, especially if somebody new comes in there to recruit. You got to have a process for them. That's why in the military, they can take anybody. They start anybody, the worst cat in the whole neighborhood. He's not, when you see him 3 years later, if he stays in, she's a changed man. But I'm saying that communities have to be set up like that. They need arbitrary components. Like when there's a dispute, how do we handle that dispute? So see, what that does is it brings us in front of the responsibility. And this is what Creator DAO and Secret Energy Foundation is funding on, is that we're now actually developing that from the bottom up or top down, depending on how you look at it. And so what we've talked about is, and we began to form is councils. Because not everybody specializes in everything. So the 2 councils that we've been informing, the first council is a council around digital assets. And what that is in our ecosystem, we will reach a point much more sooner than later where members will begin to generate digital assets. This is courses. This could be for them to be what we would call coaches. You see what I mean? So all those things could be created into digital assets. So we have a committee that's forming that when someone is ready to do that or make that move, books, digital books, those kind of things, then the committee comes in and determines if that is going to really work out because they're experts at that or have some type of expertise in that. We have another committee that's forming that's already formed that is around our soul coaches, which is the engagement that we're giving or the empowerment that we're giving certain members of the platform that have the level of seniority and awareness to be able to speak with and to mentor other creators that are coming into the platform. And so we put a council around that because what determines whether a person becomes a soul coach or not. But the beauty of all of this is actually it decentralizes for real everything, because now it's not my decision anymore. And do you know how great that feels? See, the thing is that we're seeming to deal with a faction that anytime the one that's in power loses a little bit of it, throws a hissy fit, gets mad, gets upset, because they're all so centralized. That's why it's called central bank. See, over here, it's like, boy, if I don't have to do any more work, great. And know that that's going to be carried out at the same level or even better than what I would have been able to achieve. Oh, my goodness. And knowing that all I got to do is just appoint the proper people, which actually is just common sense, and just write out, a little bit of that policy and a few of those models, and then get that refined by group wisdom, as it's called. That means everybody is giving their viewpoint on what's going on and submitting a proposal to how things should change and be updated. That means that even with the currency that's flowing through, that it's transparent so people can see, nobody's contributing. Others are actually selling, or everybody is doing really good. And that capital is being used to solidify these proposals. Let's bring real value here. Let's take 25% of this and put it into a commodity. Let's then take that commodity and then make it accessible to the community. These are proposals. And these proposals are granted based on those who have the certificates. Because what the certificate does is it allows us to remove our decision-making process from the public sector. Because when we're making public decisions, it is now their right, based on the contracts that have already been signed with others, to be able to look into our private matters down to the finest detail and even have to give names of who was engaged and involved. We don't know what that would mean in the next 5 to 10 years, 15 years. But the DAO is, There's nobody to talk to here. None of us have ownership as you would see ownership. We all have certificates that give us access to that. And if that is what they would say is a well-oiled machine, and what that means is something that is designed, like as we've been designing secret energy, it's input, output. It means if you come in with zero, we could take you from zero to priceless in less than 60 seconds. If you're coming in with what you think is everything and you're like, shut up, take my money and take me through the transformation, then we have instruments ourselves that are capable of doing that. We have assets that we've created that are valuable. We have softwares that we've pioneered. We've taken things from blank sheets of paper and then made them into wonders. We also have our hands in brand new technologies, and we own assets around those new technologies because still, as the reality gets more and more lethargic, it seems like even some of the creators are slipping on securing the assets that are necessary to roll the next venture because technology is moving too fast for them. But we're from the future. The stuff that's being used now is in the garage where we're from. It's like you can't even get rid of this stuff at a garage sale. It's like it basically has no value but sentiment. Because when you look at these technologies, even that we're using now, computers, AI, and then you look at the human body and the brain alone and the potential that it could be melded in with the soul, then you can already say, well, can I go buy one of those at Apple? Not if it's bitten off of. I mean, there goes, again, more occultism. A bitten apple is like having one wheel missing or one part or angle of a star. So if a star is supposed to roll, so by the way, a pentagram is also the symbol of an apple. As we close into some questions here, also, if you have a question, it'd probably be a good time to formulate that question. You can type that question in the chat by entering question first, and then your question, and then we'll actually get to it. The bitten apple, so when you cut an apple in half, count the seeds. It's 5. And if you get a good apple and not a GMO, you'll notice that those 5 seeds are synonymous with a pentagram. That's the geometry of an apple. And so what a bitten apple is when you remove one of the star or the angles on that pentagram. And if that pentagram could roll, if it has all 5 of its angles, which is 360 degrees or 72 times 5, and if you move one of them, what happens? It just kind of like lays off to the side. Now go look at the stars on the American flag and you'll see exactly how that lays. And so the reality is that the world is indeed magical. And there is way more beyond all of this excellent stuff. You just have to be motivated enough. And what happens is that at times our energy can be depressed, literally pushing you down deeper into the netherworld of your consciousness and subconscious mind, where lots of our fears reside of the deep. And what we are is we're like a tugboat in all of this. That little bitty tugboat, it looks small, but you need to check out the motor. And watch this big tugboat carry aircraft carriers out of danger. That's what you should see yourself as on the astral plane. You pick up broken ships on the astral plane and tow them to safe water. But remember, there are pirates amongst us that are constantly causing disturbances and confusion, especially when things are getting a little too calm, to create upheavals. And all you have to do is get yourself also to a position where you can start getting out of cities. You can start buying your own land. You can start becoming more sustainable with your consumption. You can make great investments. The thing about this project now is it still is contingent upon the community to determine what it's going to become. I've put it in your hands now. The moment we minted NFTs and we began that journey, We're saying from henceforth, the values of the things that we're creating inside of these assets, they will be governed and measured through these certificates. You hold on to the certificate becomes scarce. That's the NFT. If you sell the certificate, it becomes readily available. Then the value decreases. We minted 999 plus one NFTs, all unique, fleek stuff, on point still, like we still skimmed nowhere. I could have generated all that with AI, but we had our brother Sven go in. He spent hundreds of hours. And then what we come out with is something that represents. And then, as we said, we're going to take 222 of them and put them in the treasury too. So that increases the value. Scarcity increases value. The more people can get something like tulips, the less they're going to be worth. If you come in with ice cubes in the desert, watch how the sheiks just buy them all from you. It's like, yo, let me get, take all of those because it's rare. So that's why they call it, the NFT site is called Rarable, because NFTs at least teach you the concept of rarity. Tokens, they kind of like seem to miss that point. Minting a bunch of tokens, not good tokenomics. It's a scam to make people think that, hey, if I get 200 million of these Shiba Inus and they all hit $1, I'll be like, look at your eyes. That's a gambler. That's not somebody, that's not a well-trained investor, because the number doesn't matter. In fact, the number does matter. The large number doesn't matter. What matters is the community. You can insulate yourself as much as you want from technical hackers and get community hacked. Because if the community doesn't believe in it, when there's a dip, do you know that there's a way that when things dip, I'm not talking about stable coins, that there's virtually no dip? It's in the tokenomics. If they weren't so greedy, when I started understanding tokenomics, I'm like, man, like this is ultimate greed, many of these factions, because only small fractions of percentages are going back into the actual asset to increase its value. And generally you're holding that asset. And that's what we have to understand. So just like in that most basic way that we were talking earlier about the indentification, if you're holding an asset and that asset begins to decrease in value, which is common sense, that whatever you just invested goes down. But if you're with something and connected to something that is addressing every fiber of reality and has at least considered that and determined how that is ultimately going to impact what is being created, then I think it is much more of a secure and better way for you to secure your future and where you're going to spend your time. So as I said before, there is quests open. Many can go on these quests. Many of these quests are to educate you. They are to get you prepared for dealing with even these digital instruments, if you may. And they also help get the word out about this project more. But I will tell you that where I'm focused at right now is utility. So whatever happens with the whole project NFT, I've done as much as I could do. I got 6 more sessions. We started with 9. And then at that point, it's like, I did everything that I could do, and then now I'm going to go forward with the next thing. Because the thing that's also different about Secret Energy and pretty much most products on the blockchain is we already have a brand. We already have something. We already have a name for ourselves. We already have a community. We're not taking money and saying, hey, this is what we're going to create. What we're saying is, if you back us, we can scale this. And you can also share in those benefits. So we went from the centralized structure where whether it's failure or benefit, it's still going to be that of that one person or people that are the owners. And we are decentralizing and saying, here's what we can all create together if we can scale this to the level that it's going to go. But that's either going to be within the next few months because we have the resources, or within the next few years because we had to use the existing resources. Either way, it's going to get done. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to take some time. Probably exactly, somebody says already happened. It already happened. And once you realize what that's about, you realize that you're also responsible for maintaining every day that it already happened. Remember, the laws and rules always apply. They're universal laws, so don't get it twisted. You can change your future today to one thing and change it tomorrow to another. There's a record playing in your mind, okay? The aura is like a disc. We call it DVD, which is the acronym for David, okay? So there's a disc that is your aura, and it's playing like a record, a song. The organs are responsible for playing that song. And the condition of those organs, and if they're in tune, determines what kind of melody is being played. And then that melody corresponds to the resonance fields of the energies that you're attracting, right? And that's what makes beautiful music. So we need to understand that still ultimately a lot of this that you experience in existence hinges on you and how you feel. And my mom used to always say, never let them steal your joy, James. And so I'm telling you the same thing. Don't let nobody steal your joy. Remember, they got to work for that anyway. I trust that we even get to a level to where we can free whatever those entities have bounded themselves to, that we can free them from that. But we got to start somewhere. And when we start in a perfect model, it sends a ricochet. The noise and the vibration and the frequency that we make can be felt anywhere, everywhere. And I trust that as we solidify that more, it will become an anchor point for others that have been looking for this, and that they'll hear that song of truth for themselves. So here goes some questions. Let me get some water a little bit here. Again, I wanted to say thank you to everyone that got a chance to jump in today. I know this was a bit more longer than maybe our normal presentations in relation to this topic, but it has been, for me, a big growth. It was just basically a component of immense growth for me. And I felt that I really wanted to share this. Also, I wanted to give thanks to my other brother who also shared this with the tribe. And is allowing, this level of growth too, because that's also what Secret Energy is about, is that if you bring someone to this space, then it is recorded inside of our platform that you were responsible for bringing them to that space. And if there could be any rewards around that, then they would be going to you. And that's the type of things that we're creating. So, of course, in our future builds, we'll talk more about spirit tech, or our spiritual technologies. We'll talk a little bit more also about even the governance models. We also have a date to speak a little bit more about the DAO. We have talked even right now about our governance models and how we're putting those into play. And then we've also spoken a little bit about how we are designing what we're doing to contain more value. So that way in the future, there is really something for your children to inherit, and it's not debt. So the question here is there a financial sovereign checklist to ensure we're ticking all the boxes covered, Wealthy Bot, DAO, Foundation, affiliation, and all other initiatives and pay forms, et cetera? That would be lovely to see. I can definitely tell you that sovereignty happens on different levels, and we have something for all of those levels, but I can't say that it's in a page that says financial sovereignty, spiritual sovereignty, mental sovereignty, and I guess that is a part of the scalability of where we're at, because that takes a lot of time, takes a lot of attention. But even that you spoke it and brought it forth, then I trust that maybe something like that will be created very soon. What we have now, though, is we have a path where we first address your personal being. We give you metaphysical metrics the moment you sign up for the site, provide the proper information, and then it puts you right on your path to yourself so that you can understand more about you. And then as you start to awake to, hey, there's even things that already know everything about me, so now I can determine what I'm going to become from there. Then maybe you can look at some of the other stuff that is surrounding finances. Today, I would recommend, because it's real time, to actually check out that series, removing yourself from being a debt slave in the system, right? And gain that degree, spend your time on something like that. And then also bolt on that there is a metaphysical aspect to this. And that way you can kind of fast track your progress. The other question here is on crew 3 on level 1. I can't proceed to level 2 since, and then it kind of like trails off for a moment there. And our brother Sean said, hey, you can hit us up in support and check it out. We did notice that there from time to time is a higher volume in the crew 3 submission process. And sometimes things glitch a little bit in crew 3, but seem to restore themselves within at least an hour. So, if you're using that, do be mindful that it does have a tendency to fix itself. We've already submitted some tickets to the developers to see if they can make that a bit better. There's a question here and says, will these NFTs be marketed to others? There are about 150,000 subscribers on YouTube, and those of us in YouTube are able to learn about NFTs. How will we demonstrate to the public that we have a rare NFT to drive up its external value? Great question. So how this works is, that you have OpenSea, which is basically the #1 place for placing NFTs. There's a few other sites, but the reality is that actually all these sites are doing, as Web3 sites do, is displaying what is in a contract. So in this case, to answer your question, yes, they will be offered to others during the period of what we're doing right now. So there is the initial quest, and then there's the pre-sale period, which is 3 days before the actual open. I guess that would be called the public sale. And then during the public sale, one would go to the corresponding website, which we're going to give out in a little bit. And then you could actually mint as many Warriors of Love as you would like. I think there may be almost like there's a limit of up to 25, right? And so what this does also, just so you understand how this works, is because what you're also saying is that there needs to be someone who, and there's a specific term for this, is basically going to bring the value now, right? So that's why the NFTs are there, and then a person would actually purchase those NFTs. And the reason that has to happen is because if we're going to build something, then there's going to need to be some kind of resources to build that with. So NFTs have become popular because beyond tokens, which there's still a little bit of question around unless you have a utility of what is the legal status of tokens, you actually then have some type of financial or revenue stream coming in to where you can begin to deploy what is in the charter and what is in the manifesto and basically what is in the roadmap of the project. So of course you really want to provide the NFTs to as many people as possible so you can get along on that venture. And then once you start opening up in the DAO and the process of governance is what you will allow to be governed. And that's what I was saying before about the mentorship in the DAO space is saying that most DAOs that are entering in the space are still aspiring DAOs. And we need to understand that because TerraCoin was a DAO and everything was plugged into an autonomous contract. So when it came time to pull the plug to actually readjust the mathematics, it couldn't happen. So it forced the crash. And so in general terms, you don't want to put things in the DAO that have not been tested and can potentially create vulnerabilities. So you release the proposals and the governance models as you're building the DAO. So the first part is that you even need the actual certificates to be transferred, which of course is the people who would have an opportunity to vote and to submit proposals. When you want to demonstrate publicly, because you're using the word public versus private, that you have a rare NFT. A rare NFT is acquired based on its attributes, and there's of course a lot of information based about this on the internet. But the base price or floor price, if you may, for a Warrior of Love is 0.6 ETH. Okay, so that means that every NFT that will be minted beyond the first or #1 NFT, which will set the ceiling, it is still locked. It is #1. It will be listed at 13 ETH. Then we have the other 900 and I guess that would be 981, predominantly the last 20 are ultra rare. And this means that if we get to the point of where there's only 20 more NFTs remaining, those 20 NFTs are already coded in the contract to be ultra rare. If we never get to that point, those actually go in the treasury. And as the value increases more and more of Creator DAO and Secret Energy Foundation, generally the value increases within all subsequent assets. That is not a guarantee. So also, just to answer these questions very clearly, because they are financial questions and they allow you to be able to make the proper decisions, even though they should not be taken as investment advice. Rarity is then achieved by the attributes that are also in the other NFTs. So all the rest of the NFTs are also at the floor price of 0.6 ETH, but they have different attributes. Some of those attributes are more rare. So for our NFT, and we'll discuss this a little bit further in the future, but you can see it in the tokenomics of the NFT. There are certain objects that are very rare. It's like the staff or the right hand that is in that is in some of the NFTs. There's also IRL or in real life. There are not a lot of NFTs that have IRLs. I like the idea of in real life, so we bolted some of those on too. And there are NFTs in that 0.6 ETH bundle, if you may, or collection that actually have or are holding cuboctahedrons in their hand, or the box for the cuboctahedron. And if you have one of those, that is also redeemable for IRL cuboctahedron, or the actual object in real life. And so the rarity of an NFT, and that's why it's kind of like I guess you can call that what is the term I'm looking for? It's kind of like a grab bag or what's that again? Yeah, mystery box. Thank you. As you can see, I've demystified all mystery, so the word mystery doesn't exist in my data set anymore. I was like, let me load that back in. A mystery box. So what is a mystery box? It's when everything has the same price, but there are things inside of that can potentially be worth more. So obviously, if your NFT has a higher rarity, it's worth more than the base price. Now, what governs you being able to get that? It is strictly the luck of the draw and the amount of NFTs that you actually have. So hopefully that clarifies how NFTs bundle in their rarity, and also what we've chose to do with our NFTs. Yeah, we do have 150,000 subscribers on YouTube. We have also more social media channels. We have members inside the platform, and there are 999 NFTs. So obviously we have more people that we're engaged with than we have NFTs, but we'll see what happens, because everything here is still contingent upon other integers that we do not control, which is how many people actually know about it, how much do people have to invest in such things. So all those are different dynamics. Also, I will again address that, as we've noticed, especially since the fall from 65,000, that the markets have been a bit low. But the benefit of this is that if we launched when Bitcoin was at 65,000, then technically it would be almost impossible for there not to be losses. But if there are investments on the floor or somewhere near the floor, then there's really only one direction. And so to me, that's better logic. So for sure, you would get more adoption when everything is going well, but you would actually get way more stability if you started on the floor or near the floor, because, at the end of the day, who can really call where the floor is? Again, if there's a question, you need to put question before it, because I'm really looking for that. So I'm not going to read all messages that are in the chat. So the next question is if you have Tron, can it be exchanged for ETH to purchase an NFT? Absolutely, because Tron is a ERC20 token and can be transferred back into Ethereum as any ERC20 token can be. I think someone is asking a question, but they didn't put question before it, and I will answer it since it seems to be the last thing here. And it says, so the only way to achieve in real life is to purchase many NFTs. Well, let's say, for instance, the in real life that we're talking about is the cuboctahedron. You want to pass the box on that? So we're talking about like this particular item here that's inside of this box. And there are a limited amount of these just because it takes time to build one of these. Right now, there's 30 of them. And that 30 is pretty much allocated within the NFT minting process, because there's the 10. I just don't want to get confused here. And yeah, there is the 10 and then there's the 20. So there's a 10 that's in the general collection, and then there's the final 20. So what we're going to do, obviously, though, is because this is a product of Spirit Tech, is once we can get to a level of being able to generate more of these, then they will be listed on the platform at some point inside of the marketplace. These also, the ones that are going to be received as IRLs, because there are serial numbers on these units, that it will be registered in that serial number, the actual NFT or blockchain address for that particular object. Will all of them be done that way? At this point, it is a no, meaning not all of the units will be on the blockchain except for the ones that were initially provided through the Warriors of Love NFT launch. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense to you, that still the vector equilibrium, which is some pretty interesting technology within itself, will still be available to the general market after there can be produced more. This question is asking me to speak a little bit more on the timing regarding the opening of the Secret Energy NFT marketplace. Okay, so the first thing is to probably take a look at the roadmap, because it does lay out everything very specifically on what is the timing around things. However, what I also wanted to mention is that, as I mentioned before about this, is that our marketplace is predominantly going to consist of digital assets that are generated from members inside of the community. That could be an NFT, meaning it could be a piece of artwork, but we're also wanting to not exclude courses, not exclude music and things of that nature. So we're not as interested as just becoming a marketplace for other users to drop in their NFTs from all over the place just because they want to put their NFTs as in many places as possible so that it can sell. What we're more of saying is that we want to become the decentralized marketplace for the conscious community part of the blockchain, because the things that we will predominantly want to support in our marketplace would have something to do with accelerating a person's well-being, right? So that's really how we're looking at the marketplace, because you can actually create a marketplace really fast. So even if you're interested in creating one, there's some NFT templates right out of the box that allow you to create marketplaces. So you too could become your own OpenSea. However, you got to realize OpenSea also exists. And why would somebody want to list their NFT with you, especially if all they really want to do is sell it? And that means that you need to be able to expose them to another market that OpenSea can't expose them to. And because we crunch this stuff all day and know the logic in it, we know that the only way a marketplace would be beneficial for us is that if the things that were in that marketplace would be interesting to our community. And then someone would want to list such things with us, because they would know that if they listed it on OpenSea, that there would be a less of a probability that somebody would be interested there. Also, as we continue to deploy, as I mentioned, our models, we're moving forward into creating systems that allow creators. Implementing systems that actually allow our creators to design and develop things such as books, courses, etc., in conjunction with other co-creators to increase the probability that it will come to market. So again, if you have this great book idea, you've already written the script, but you need it to be illustrated, you need an editor, I'm just using this as an idea, then you will be able to come into Creator DAO, find an editor and find an illustrator and collaborate with them on the project. And then when you would list this product onto the marketplace, the system, the blockchain, which is really good for this type of thing, would basically issue those payments to each respective wallet the moment the transaction was made. And those kind of systems are beautiful because they require zero audit, so nobody's got to determine just how many sold, and they're trustless. So that means that the person doesn't have to rely on you to tell them that something actually sold and then gain access to auditing something if that's not believed. So it looks like there is another question here. And that question is, please speak. Okay, actually that's the same question. Okay. All right. So it looks like that we've actually made it to the end of today's build about NFTs, but more importantly, how to truly remove yourself from debt-based systems. The knowledge is for sure priceless. If it was a little confusing to you, don't worry. It gets a lot more easier as you continue to study it. And stuff like this, just like if somebody tried to throw trigonometry right at you right away, could, and especially after you've gone through basic mathematics, it could draw a blank. We are adepts here. It's very important for us to at least continue our adepthood. And this means that sometimes when we come into spaces, instead of starting all the way from the beginning again and just having a general basic conversation around whatever we wish to discuss, we kind of go right into the depth layers of it. Hopefully that sparks some interest, because you would then be hearing something that you have not heard before. Maybe there would be some resonance. That's what we use etymology for, because once you start realizing the code that is within the words, then you realize that actually words do really mean something, have power, and are used in a very specific way to evoke energy. Obviously, now I'm going to be taking a look at the UCC, which is a Universal Custom Code or Universal Coding Systems, because I've now caught wind that has been around for thousands of years and actually contains many of these inner workings that is going on with our souls, which is quite interesting that things have gotten that deep. And for us, what we have to realize is that the United States went bankrupt in 1878, I believe, after the war. And from that point, the corporation that pretty much everyone is bonded to is bankrupt. So at minimum, bankrupt. There were certain terms to state its condition, but what it basically means is that you're a ward of a bankrupt corporation. So that's pretty wild, because it's not even like, so technically then everybody inside of the bankrupt corporation is dead. That's why the letters are all caps. And that's why on a tombstone, all the letters are capitalized. So this is technically, from the point of view of legalese, an underworld full of zombies. Basically, I mean, it's wild, right? But an underworld full of zombies using currency of a promise of future value that is constantly readjusted based on tragedies. So it's a bit deeper than maybe most YouTube videos have led on about how we would get out of debt and what debt truly is. So I trust that it also does incite you to personally be a little bit more proactive, or a lot bit, if that's a word, proactive about your own release from the system. And also remember that it's up to you. And a window's open, window of opportunity. A broken clock is right at least 2 times a day. So if you're trying to worry or wonder, why me? There's some simple logic around why maybe one life you would have an opportunity to release yourself from infinite bonds. And also to realize that none of these instruments, if you may, are innately by themselves evil. What happens if you bond yourself to a sun, like a magnetar of energy? You see what I mean? What happens if you bond yourself to great principles? Good habits, like even if you look at the word habit, it seems like, oh yeah, habits are bad. That's not the definition of habit. A habit is just something that you do over and over again or repetitiously. So there can be good habits. There could be good bonds. There could be good assets. So, you know, don't polarize yourself with the system itself, because actually it's ancient. But realize that those who are using the system have chose to abuse the system and then leverage the instruments that are inside the system against your benefit. So wholeness and balanced vibrations. Thank you so much again. I'll definitely unmute the lines for a grand crescendo of wholeness for all those that are here. And I trust that you'll continue to go forward with wisdom and knowledge of exactly how things are working around you. Wholeness.
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 Wholeness, family.
Wholeness.
Wholeness, family. Wholeness.
Love.
Everybody.
Beautiful sun.